Very good morning to all our dear listeners. Welcome to another edition of ACFIM Talks this Friday. It's cold here in Kampala, but I'm so sure that everybody is. Grab a cup of tea, cup of coffee, and you are joining me on this rendezvous edition of ACFIM Talks, and we are discussing a very interesting topic, money in politics and electoral manipulation. Before I get it started, I'm encouraging every one of you to join in our social media platforms that will be flashed on the screen on our YouTube, ACFIM Uganda, on our Twitter handle at ACFIM UG, and on our Facebook, ACFIM, so that you can be part of the conversation and you can make your contributions and even ask your questions. My name is Felix Kafuma, usual, the one moderating today's edition, today on the Friday of the 26th of November. And with me in the studios, so far I have one guest, but I'm expecting a second guest, but allow me to introduce them as they get on set. Let me start with the lady. The lady will be joining us shortly. She's called Bonnie Chichoncho Mutungi. For some of you who follow the politics of 2021, she did contest as the city woman MP for Mbarara, and unfortunately she lost. She contested on the NRM card, and I think that is a very good candidate to discuss this topic. But before then, she has also worked extensively on areas of governance. She was the executive director for a women's rights organization called Center for Women in Governance. She's a social scientist, done a lot of work around governance and accountability, and with particular lens on political governance, gender, and political participation. She's called Bonnie Chichoncho Mutungi, and when she gets here, I'll be able to usher her in, and also again briefly introduce her for those who are just joining us. Already, he is a political analyst and scholar. He holds a postgraduate certificate in public policy from Blavantic, I hope I pronounced that right, School of Government in University of Oxford. Is currently pursuing his PhD in international relations at University of St Andrews in Scotland. He also has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, International Relations from Makerere University, and is an associate of King's College London, with also a Master's in International Relations and Contemporary War Studies Department, King's College London. Jude, you are most welcome to this show. Jude, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you, Felix. And a very good morning to all our viewers and listeners out there. It will be a pleasure interacting with you during such an important topic that defines our lives and livelihoods, especially that politics in Africa is a very brutal game. Thank you once again, Felix, for hosting me here.
Great. As we wait for Bonnie, allow me to start with you, throw you in the deep end straight away. I was reading one of the papers you presented recently where you had a section that talked about electoral manipulation that I can confess partly informed the topic for today's discussion, where you referred to African countries, many African countries failing to manage genuine the transfer of power, mainly because of the colonial hangover of the past. And help me and help the viewers out there to understand, can you trace the origin of electoral manipulation in Uganda's politics? And is this really a problem you can apportion partly to have been created by colonialists?
Yeah, so thank you, Felix. And again, good morning to all viewers. But just before I start, I would like to explain some few things in context. When we talk about Africa, we need to be very careful about Africa. Africa is not homogeneous. It's a very huge territory, and we have different cultures and dynamics that shape and control politics. During the last talk show, when we are doing the political economy analysis, or a peer analysis, in the context of how elections are managed in Africa, we have to take into cognizance of the contextual aspects that define power. And the political economy analysis, we are looking at all those factors, both historical and contemporary, as well as the actors and dynamics that affect the shaping of power. Now, if you look at Africa per se, and here I'm talking more about sub-Saharan Africa because the northern part tends to be seen as Middle East or part of the Arabic cultures, is that the colonial masters left us with a continent that was kind of wretched in terms of a preparation, in terms of administration going out into post-independence. And the guys who first assumed power, who was unfortunately most men, were basically what you'd call inheritance elites, who then simply did the funny things. One, adopt what the colonists were doing in terms of controlling power. And the way the colonists were holding power was basically through brutal force. And you could see that in places like in Kenya, where the Mau Mau was brutally crushed, and other places like Algeria, where Trinke and others did a lot of unpleasant stuff. So our inheritance is kind of moving with a hangover. And this is something that is also psychological. If you look at it, people who tend to go through bad experiences tend to export or project that to other people. So coming to the post-independence and across Africa, if you're looking at Kwame Nkrumah in his book, in Conscientism, he's talking about one party, politics being a pleasant kind of a lever of controlling power. We see that in Nyerere as well, and then also later on the likes of Obitre, pushing agendas that were very much not different from what the colonists were doing. So in one way or another, much as we cannot continue blaming colonialists, that then you have the colonial phase and also what you call the Cold War phase, which was a continuation of colonialism in a different manner, where these inheritance elites became a problem. And unfortunately, most of them were men, and that's how we tend to have a big man problem, and also the warlord culture coming to control the politics. So this is the unfortunate part about politics in Africa, is that we are caught between this umbilical cord that should have been severed off, but continue to play it on and on. And by the way, if you look at how politics is being managed in Africa, even in the context of Uganda, I don't see much difference between what we were in the 1960s when the British were here in terms of how they were controlling power. It could actually have been transitioned to worse than how they were. And that is the same way that you see Zimbabwe or other countries that are brutally managed by one-party states that pretend to be democratic, but when in a sense they are militarized units that control power like you do in an army unit. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. And you introduce, I can now see the thread of the inheritance elites. And should we assume that this has continued until today, that the current challenges around our electoral politics, especially when it comes to transitions and the use of the taking advantage of the big man syndrome to maintain and stay in power, is the inheritance elites a problem we are seeing continuing to manifest now in our contemporary politics?
Oh yeah. Actually, most regimes that you will see in Africa, especially those that are highly militarized or weaponized, Rwanda, Uganda, even Kenya, that pretends to be a very beautiful kind of democracy. Most of these regimes are not democratic per se, but to an extent they are also authoritarian in the same way. So this culture has continued because for you to control power, like Max Weber tells us, you need to have monopoly over violence. Make no mistake that sometimes we tend to construe violence as violence, but you need to have control over the levers of violence to control power. And as a result of that, most of the leaders, and here I would love to say our misleaders, have effectively done what the colonists did. You need to control the army, you need to control the resources, and brutally also keep the population in check. Not necessarily through guns, but also through intelligence and also control of economic units. I talked about a Russian a poet and writer, Obitre, who talks about pointing the gun at the population. But at one point in time, of course, we see that eventually the arms of that soldier get tired. Now, the soldiers in Africa seem to have big muscles, and they have pointed these guns at the population for a very long time. And unfortunately, this is where we are, and that's how democracy becomes a mockery. Shedler talks about elections without democracy in Africa, and that's kind of very conspicuous in the way African leaders or misleaders tend to control power and shape it. So we are into that nexus. But at one point, of course, like many other scholars have done, that at one point you want to sever that umbilical cord and say, listen, we have to stop talking about the currency and own up that we have a deficit in terms of our leadership and governance in Africa. I'm caught between these schools of thought that you can't keep blaming the colonials for all their bad habits, but also look at ourselves and say, look, at what point we have to start assuming ownership and therefore blame our leaders and also our population, because the leaders emanate from us to go where they are. And if we sell votes, we always come back to pay for that dearly.
Wow. This is a very interesting discussion, and I hope Bonnie can join us later on, because I would want to hear perspectives. But as I wait for Bonnie, you've triggered something. So when you make such an argument, and I think even here in your paper you referred to the fact that the liberal democracy which was imposed on us probably can we argue that it has failed to deliver on the anticipated outcomes of democracy? So if that is the argument, and if that is the case, what kind of democracy should Africa that can work for Africa, looking at the context?
You're talking about what kind of democracy works for Africa. The concept of democracy is very controversial and problematic. It also has very many ambiguous meanings. And Professor Sampo Collier says democracy in adjectives. We have to be very careful here. Is that democracy is very difficult to actually define. It's also very difficult to sell as a one-size-fits-all. So therefore, I'm constrained to say what kind of democracy works for Africa. In my paper, I talk about
what would you prescribe?
Yeah.
What could you prescribe if for example, if the neoliberal kind of democracy that was handed to Africa, we seem to be grappling. It doesn't seem to be working very well. You've talked about
Absolutely.
how most of our regimes are combining, have huge elements of authoritarianism. So what could you prescribe for Africa within context?
Again, that one single size bullet, even if it is from a Maxim gun, becomes very difficult to sell. Again, we need to move carefully from country to country. And I think, for me, the first thing that is very critical in Africa is how we take the military out of politics. And I think the military becomes a very big problem in Africa. I've not found any country in Africa where the army has not become a very disturbing factor, whether it is in Kenya, whether it is in Rwanda, whether it is in Uganda or Tanzania. So I think the first thing is that the army, not just from the constitutional perspective, but also from the strategic culture of the country, should take a backseat role in terms of how we run the politics on the front end. And of course, the other second thing is for us to have a very strong constitutional culture that allows our laws to work and not be altered each time an incumbent chooses to wake up on the other side of the bed. So it becomes very, very paramount that in Africa, when we talk about democracy, like you said, you tend to have the authoritarian hand behind that democracy. And that's the whole mockery. And this becomes weaponized when you have elections and you have the international observers, who are also another complicated industry which come to legitimize what we call a charade of democracy. And this is quite fraudulent. So in Africa, I think we need to start looking at things within country by country, but also be careful when we say African solutions for African solutions. This kind of talk that has been marketed by the likes of Museveni and other leaders that Africans can decide their own politics becomes a very big quandary in terms of how we look at things. So again, no single size bullet even from a Maxim gun. But I think once we start having a constitutional culture that's ingrained within our politics and also having the army take a backseat role, then we can start thinking of how to design how we want to govern ourselves. But also watch out for the international actors, because in many cases, if not all, they always play that hand or put a thumb on that scale that gives the authoritarian the right to govern. And that's why you see dimensions like security become very important. Oh, he's a bad guy, but he'll keep the Great Lakes safe. He's a bad guy, but he'll keep the population running. So you have all these kind of actors with different interests, And their interests keep changing at all the time, but at one point they converge where they want to control the population for their own benefit. And especially when you go to countries with resources, it becomes very dangerous when you have these kind of actors who tend to have a very different mindset from the population and what we think is good for us. So democracy, again, a double-edged sword, very difficult to define. And I would like to take the words of Collier. It's a word in adjectives. We've got to be very careful with this word. Thank you.
Yeah, and one of my colleagues has just been posting and is citing a number of examples which I'm so sure you can relate with. We've seen a number of military coups in the past in the past decade. It's as if people are starting to contest electoral outcomes. You see, we have perfected the art as Africa to organize, almost making elections a ritual exercise. But we are seeing a trend of coups of late. Can you help us understand, is democracy still a viable system of governance in Africa, of electing our leaders? Because we are consistently seeing coups happening in Africa.
Yeah, so stroke of the nation is always going to be there. And we've got to look at also the different type of coups. If you look at the one in Zimbabwe, the kind of guardian coup, where Mnangagwa, the crocodile, and his other bunch of military guys put Mugabe in a house, and then they make him sign some paperwork and then promise him a life, but God forbid he doesn't live for long. You can have coups manifest in the same way that you've seen in Zimbabwe. Now, what has changed in Africa are the days where you would go to a post office or go to a TV station and take off a mast and then control the radio waves. Coups are happening in Africa. Some of them are benign, some of them are kind of very visible and dramatic. Simply because the power still revolves around the people who hold the gun. I can tell you that one. Even in Kenya, at the time when Moi was stepping down from power, he was called in a room by the generals and they said, your time is up. In the book of Daniel, we read about the writing on the wall. When King Belshazzar is called by Daniel and said the writing is on the wall. So most of these leaders tend to have the writing on the wall that if you don't keep your army with you or your intelligence, it's always a matter of time. And also, remember that the people who control the guns and the intelligence tend to be connected always by external actors. And this is where the power play happens. In Uganda today, you see that almost every strategic point is controlled by the army. Now they want to build schools. They want to build hospitals. They control immigration. They control the distribution of ID. They're everywhere. In Tanzania, it's even worse. It's even worse that the army controls almost everything. So coups inevitably will come. It's only the threshold of that coup. It could be a guardian one. It could be as brutal as the one for Liberia, and how Sergeant Doe is chased out of his office and then gets into that kind of volley of bullets, and all this kind of drama that you see in Africa. And then also the statistics of those coups. Where is it happening most? Especially when you look at West Africa. Why is it happening most? And these things are very critical because at one time you always have that soldier coming up. We've seen the drama in Sudan. The guy captures power, he's put under pressure, then hey, he brings you a prime minister. But is that prime minister really in control? So you have kind of a mannequin controlling power, but someone else is using this mannequin with the joystick. So coups, the threat of the army being in the politics remains very key in how we're going to look at Africa transition to what we would call a democratic culture. But I'm afraid to say that democratic culture will just come easily. I'm always constrained to believe that actually we are always going to be caught between democracy on one hand and then also authoritarianism on the other hand, and always sit in the middle. And even the folks who tend to come into power and pretend to be democratic eventually transition into problems. We saw that with Chiluba in Zambia. He starts talking well, then after some time, he starts drinking wine and is drunk with power. We also see the same thing in Malawi. Oh, corruption, this, then when you're going to London, you're moving with your wife, your children. So African leaders are problematic, and as a result of that, they're always trying to strike deals with those who control power. And that is the military, the intelligence, and inevitably the people who give us money from abroad. And these are our international actors who, on one or another, will always want to have Africa on a leash. And the Chinese have learned that game now. And you can see that the first thing they do to Africa, even during COVID, is to give you military trucks. And then after that, you'll get Chinese doctors coming in from the army. So everyone understands in Africa, you need to have a club or a big stick to control power in that homestead. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. This is getting very, very interesting. Now, let me kind of like throw in here something around money in politics, because it's money in politics and electoral manipulation. And help us understand that, okay, I know that on one end you've ably explained how the role of military in controlling power. But I believe it's not only the military that controls power, also money comes into the mix. And we've seen the number of examples we can cite, including within our own elections here in the backyard, where money has been used to control power, or to even determine, in some instances, electoral outcomes. But help us, how does unregulated use of money conjure electoral manipulation in this case? If on one hand I have the army probably as backup, but on the other hand also I'm using money as a weapon, how does money end up now manufacturing or manipulating electoral processes and outcomes in the context of Africa?
So this is a very good observance. And of course, even in a home, money is a very key enabler. Even in the churches, money is a key enabler. Sometime I was struck, I went to a church and I was dressed in a very average manner, and no one wanted to touch me. The next Sunday I was in a suit, and they were fighting to displace someone in the front pew. And I asked the usher what happened last week. I was here and I sat behind. So money is a very big problem. And that's why people who normally talk about cashless economies and all these kind of topics, or the death of money, are in a total joke. Because as long as money is available in a cash form, it will become a critical enabler for controlling politics, organized, and things to do with what we call rogue operations in intelligence industries. So money is a key thing. But who controls that money? In countries like Zimbabwe, where Mugabe would just wake up and print money, he could as well destroy your life. In 1 second, you're rich. In the morning, you're broke. In other countries, they can actually impoverish you. And you see that in Africa or in Uganda, that during elections, that's when we tend to have socio-economic programs. Bonaba, Gagawale, Myoga, they keep changing these names, but the whole logic is the same. And then you start seeing people moving with money in cars, envelopes, then paying off polling agents. And that problem also goes into political parties. They start talking about the mall. And then people start crossing from one party to the other. And then people start speaking as if they are possessed by the Holy Spirit. So money is a very big factor. But let me point about two things. In any country, when you control elections, there are what we call key electoral choices. One is the electoral system. To control an electoral system is very important. And we've seen the context of Uganda, how we break our laws. Where does it start? In parliament? 5 million shillings. Unbelievable. That's probably about 1,000 pounds. And someone sells his soul and he goes back home and has a proper meal with his wife and children and he sleeps normally. The second thing is that you want to, what you'd call, control candidates and a set of political parties. You saw that during the elections here. Someone is fighting for the NAP logo, an umbrella, and all this kind of joke. They go to court, okay, Bobby Wine, you own this party, but you don't own that. Elections end, and you see control of political parties. Then also registering so many of them. Remember Betty Kamya running around with her federal party, moving around the country, wasting people's time, taking signatures. And after some time, she then canopies under the NRM, the same party that she was abusing over time. So money can also lead to that kind of scenario. Then there's also about the apportionment and also the malapportionment of that. Again, you go back to the politicians. When you talk about all these discussions in parliament, they can actually take you out of the equation through just small laws. Then also the timing of elections. Who decides what? Why and when? Some of these things happen in the courtrooms. But how safe are our judges from the temptation of money? It's so difficult, very difficult. Then also you talk about the election day itself and the entire infrastructure of putting up an electoral system. The bids that happen there, the tenders that happen there, who supplies your voter verification system, who does the transmission? It's all about money. It's about the money. The same guys who supply the equipment don't even control that. We saw that in Kenya, where the elections were just a joke. The transmission system didn't work. Someone was controlling the server somewhere else. Again, it's about money. And we need to pay attention to the tenders that happen towards elections and thereafter. The same guys who bring us equipment here are the same people who are actually taking out our votes. And then also campaigning and campaign finance. Today in Uganda, if you don't have money, you cannot contest. I'm told in Western Uganda, for a primary in NRM, you need about 2 billion. And then on the real election, you need another 2 billion. Now, when you calculate the entire earning of an MP during the 5 years, I always ask myself the question, how would you break even? But they break even because, again, they cut deals that involve money. The same happens at the presidential. You need money to run it. So money is a key enabler. As long as people are still poor, as long as people don't have the civil consciousness, people will always be at the ready to trade. And that malaise has also gone to our elites. That malaise has gone to the elites, it has gone to the churches. We no longer trust even our own bishops, our own sheikhs to be the guardians of the state. What do they get? Each time they get an ordination, a pajero. In Kenya, it's the same. We see Ruto moving to churches with billions and sacks of money, launching churches from time to time. This is all about oiling the system. So it's a very big problem. But also, our external actors use the same. Hey, if you don't do this, we are going to hold aid. If you don't do this, we will cancel your visas. They start talking about the Magisky Acts and all that. So both internally and externally, we are at crossroads where money controls us. So we need to be very conscious. It's an enabler. And the army also knows the value of money. And that's why in most cases, they are placed at those critical and strategic points within the economy. So you make a very valid point that money in politics, very simple equation, is equal to electoral manipulation. I'm tempted to take an equation of the great German physician, where you say E is equal to MC squared, because electoral manipulation is basically money squared.
Wow. Electoral manipulation equals to money squared. This is, I think, already I'm already having my one of the take homes out of this very interesting discussion. I want to come back to the issue of the big man syndrome. Why is it that the laws, especially laws in Africa, I'll talk about Africa in the context, don't seem to curtail or keep at arm's length or control the power of incumbency. Even when initially the laws start well, let's assume that someone is in office and means well, along the way they start to tamper with the laws to serve self. Why is it that we get into a situation whereby individuals rise above the laws, rise above institutions, and to the extent that these laws, instead of working for the people, the institutions, instead of working for the people, end up working for the individuals, and the power of incumbency becomes problematic to deal with in an electoral process. And this seems to be cutting across the continent of Africa. Why are we in that kind of situation? And what can be done anyway?
Yeah, it's good you mentioned big men. We've not had big women. So the ladies who are out there should actually feel proud. Because when you talk about people like Salif, she comes out as one of those good examples. And then you have a joke like Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia, winning a Nobel laureate and then turning the country into a hodgepodge. So I would like to, first of all, thank our women that each time they've been called to serve, they have done that with dignity. And that is a fact. But I would like to take a quotation from Emmanuel Ojo, who is the current reader at the Department of Eco-Science at the University of Lorraine, Nigeria. And he talks about violence and deep fraud elections, where he says it lends credence to the fact that democracy comes at a high price in many countries. Each year, hundreds of people lose their lives in connection with fiercely contested elections. So the big man is not just being big in the room, but also he's taking life with him. I also want to take another quotation from Bratton, and this is very important for Africa, where he mentions that in a democracy, an election campaign is supposed to be conducted as a peaceful and open discourse of persuasion. Now, in Africa, it's not persuasion. Someone holds a bow or an arrow or a panga and then comes to you and says, I want your vote. He goes on further to say that in Africa, however, elections more closely resemble bitter struggles over access to the resources controlled by the state, which are the biggest prize in most African states. Given these high stakes, politicians resort to a variety of means, fair or foul, to attain public office. So it's about getting that power. Just like Max Weber, the German student, tells us, In order for you to control power, you need to have the monopoly of power, of violence. We see that also when you look about how the Leviathan works in the political philosophy world, is that that's kind of a big thing to control. You need to have control over power, and in most cases, anarchy. So as soon as you come to office, the first thing that hits your mind, hey, I have power, I'm drunk now with the power, but how do I consistently maintain that power? And this is when the politicians get ugly and then start playing these kind of games. So the big man syndrome is a problem. But also it's catching across in Europe. You're starting to see these habits in Hungary. You are seeing that in Belarus. But also Donald Trump. Let's not forget about the East at the Capitol Hill. We are starting to see that in Turkey. So the big man syndrome is no longer an African problem. We are at crossroads where now the Western Hemisphere can no longer be an example. We also see that in Latin America, the Maduros of this world. We see that in many countries also in the Middle East. If you go to Saudi Arabia, which is the holy seat of Islam, and the house of Wahhabi, power is contested brutally, fierce. You see Salman with his brothers taking very different paths. One of my greatest heroes, Khashoggi, who was brutally murdered, is because of how people can be so brutal to follow you into other continents and filch you. We see that in Rwanda the same, how the state has got very long arms that can even crush you. So big man syndrome, or big man syndrome, or the warlord Democrat, all these guys, call them bishops, call them eunuchs, they're all drunk with power. And as long as they sit in a place where they're not secure, they will always use violence to control power. And if you come in their way, they crush you. But we've just talked about one thing, it's about the money. They will either deny you the money or they will take what you have. Today, it takes a lot of courage to actually speak about electoral reforms in this country. It takes a lot of courage to be seen as an activist. It takes a lot of courage to start pointing your finger at the state. As soon as you do that, then they start looking at your balance sheet and sometimes come up with fictitious charges about your tax returns. So it's a very unfortunate thing. It's not a Ugandan thing. It's catching everywhere. It's catching like a fire, one of those great Australian fires, perhaps. And it's very problematic that even in China today, you see Xi Jinping doing the same things Africans are doing. Perhaps one of the most powerful Chinese presidents that has come into the fold. And he's trying to bully everyone. So the big man syndrome is now getting out of even just the democratic topics into other things to control what we call the big power dynamics. I hope I answer your question.
Sure. Thank you so much. And we've been joined by another guest. I introduced her earlier while she was away, and I'm glad that, Bonnie, you've been able to join us. You are most welcome. Bonnie, can you please unmute? Unmute yourself so that we can be able to engage. You are still muted, Bonnie, but it's good to have you, and you're very welcome to ACFIM Talks. We are discussing money in politics and electoral manipulation. And as a contestant for the just concluded elections.
I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, you are now audible, and it would be good to benefit from your experiences as someone who contested in the just concluded elections back in Uganda. For starters, what really we are discussing money in politics and electoral manipulation, and we've seen this also somehow determine electoral outcomes. On the scale of between money and violence, what could probably have worked against you not to end up the current MP for Mbarara? I think you contested as for that post for Mbarara City Woman MP.
Yes,
so
please.
Probably could share your experiences with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be here today. Good morning, dear viewers and listeners. I am Bonnie Kasheija Mutungi, a contestant woman MP Mbarara City, and actually national NRM flag bearer, who is still a flag bearer because he remained a flag bearer for 5 years. I did go to the flag. I contested. I went through the elections. There was very great and high welcome in the community for me to have been there. But I'm glad to discuss the topic of money versus violence in politics. Right from my previous work, where because previously before I contested, I was the executive director, Center for Women in Governance, and we had done a lot in regard with encouraging women, encouraging, training, mentoring women to participate in elective politics, not just leadership, but elective politics. We deal a lot with women councillors, LC5 chairpersons, and all other political spaces that women can occupy, including MPs, but we had decided to concentrate more at district levels on women councillors. Personally, I am happy that I eventually, having been teaching, advocating, and mentoring people to join politics, I am happy that I also tested the field of politics. You asked me a direct question. Was it violence or money that led you not to be in parliament? Actually, for me, what lacked was being pronounced. I had the votes, still a lot in the box, they were seen. Eventually, I imagined in the whole city at the pronunciation was only 160 votes difference. But even then, that came after money exchange. In Bara, I wouldn't say that there was a lot of physical violence. And elsewhere, especially the western part of the country where I was understanding more, but there was a lot of money exchange, a lot. The person I was particularly contesting with had the money, God knows where she got it from. First of all, before I talk about myself, let me just address the whole issue of money in politics. It is so unfortunate in Uganda here today that people no longer have a sense of knowing who is the right leader and who is the possibly not the suitable leader because of money. First of all, as you campaign, when you're campaigning, you find people waiting, hoping from one campaign to another, standing on the roadside saying, aha, this one has passed, we have a soda. They also, actually, it becomes business. It is so disheartening, it is so disturbing that some people have made it business. They wake up in the morning and you'll find it, stand where they know their campaign grounds, and what they do is to wait for one candidate after the other to receive 1,000 shillings. So even then, you hear someone saying you have not reached, of course, like us women who have bigger constituency areas, it's always difficult and challenging to reach everywhere. But when you get a message from your campaign agents, the first thing they tell you is, say, a group in Katukuru or a group in Mbara City, Nyamtiobora, says you have not reached them, they have not even taken a soda from you. And someone feels that is a great point, not even reaching them, but they have not taken a soda from you. Then when you go there, the issue is you gave this group this much, you didn't give this group this much. That becomes a whole issue about money. Even unfortunately, I belong to a Catholic church, and I'm staunch and the love of Catholic religion. Even unfortunately, the religious sects, you find that what they look into you sometimes is to be at the fundraising and to compare you in terms of how much you have put at that fundraising than your capacity sometimes. I don't want to say that I was not supported because of what. I was really supported, I was really welcomed, but you feel that as a country, we are going astray. As a country, we have lost the essence of what leadership should be. Then the worst comes on a voting day, where some people, of course, there are those who have predetermined mind, who know I must vote Bonnie or I must vote so and so. And I appreciate those ones and give reasons, and they are predetermined leaders. But the worst is even like, for example, some local party leaders who wait to see who gives them a bigger package in order to swing other people into a certain direction. You find a whole like NRM chairperson in a district or in a city or in a sub-county. All your work is with you today, but tomorrow your opponent has given him a package, and it's not little money, a package of about 50 million, 30 million, and all of a sudden, like my experience, the whole district chairperson of NRM turns around, starts calling people, making allegations. State House has said they don't want that one, we should leave the other one, let's vote this one. That's now money has started working. Now through certain top leaders. So where you find that even some top leaders in the area are really overtaken by money. Sometimes we blame the local people for no good reason. Sometimes they are hoodwinked. Because personally, I had an experience of where a chairperson of the NRM of a certain area of Ubara City had to take up a month of calling people to misdirect them, and that was on the voting eve. After being given, I'm not very sure, I wouldn't say, but I was told he was given 100 million, although someone physically saw the money on the table being displayed to him. And I was even told by, for example, the LC1 chairpersons who could not go to with Wink in his gimmick, whom he would call and give 300,000 each, telling them, do not vote Bonnet, the game has changed, we are voting for so. If you accept, then he gives you 300,000. Those who refused are actually the ones who came and confessed to me. And one of my agents who came found the money being displayed on his table is the one who came and told me. That is how far we've gone with the money. Then there are those on the voting day who just come, stand near the line, and they tell you openly, we are waiting for one who will give us more. And you actually see openly. It's so unfortunate and so hurting that it is so open that someone says, for you, you've given me 1,000 or 2,000, then someone all of a sudden comes with 20,000 notes. God knows where people get money, and starts giving people, and you see people from all of a sudden coming from one line to another line after being given a 20,000 note or 5,000 note or 50,000. It does not stop there, my dear listeners and viewers. You give, I've told you, the chairpersons of the party, you give to the voters themselves. Even on the pronouncement, you try to woodwink leaders, some DPC, you try to woodwink some people who are going to pronounce the election. It's to the extent that if you say we contest this box, then someone plays around. So money exchanges hands right from the day you start campaigns to the pronouncing of who is the winner. It is that good, it is that smart, or it is that terrible for our country. I can give so many examples, but for me, I would say, cry the beloved country, because it's that we reap what we sow. Because it is reached a stage whereby you cannot know that actually this leader came to parliament because people voted him or her. You can only know how much money did this person have. That's when you will know how much money this person have, and that's how you eventually end in parliament. Not because you are capable, not because you actually gathered a lot of votes. No, even the votes, if it is for the votes I have, not because you gathered it, but because you lacked money to wink or to influence a few people here and there. You influence voters with money, you influence top leadership with money, you influence, so it is at that level. So for me, in the first stage, I make a simple conclusion as I'll continue discussing. What we need most, what I want us to discuss and concentrate on most is mindset change. Mindset change.
Okay.
And it is so unfortunate, as I've said, is that we need to start from some top leaders, not only for the lay people on the ground, even the top leaders, to know that this 1,000 you receive in 5 years really does not change your life, but the leader you've sent at a certain level will change your life in one way or the other. So we need that mindset change, even to know that for some leaders whom you call, in our language, they say kafuru in politics, they need to be sieved a little bit. Because someone in Imbara, we have a person who is well known that always when there is that always when there is money, he will change, and he's been left to be a leader for so long. So for me, I think even as the leadership of different parties, as leadership of the electoral commission, we need to look into the issue of who should be our leader, who should really translate democracy and good governance in society before we even change the local people. The local people can always change if the leadership has changed. But we need a mindset change program as early as yesterday.
Wow, that's Bonnie Mutungi. It was worth waiting for you because your experiences bring this home. I'm still going to run with you on my next line of questioning if I bring in Jude. I have another question that I would want you, and they're about two. I don't know how you combine them or deal with them separately. The first question is around the electoral cycle. From your experience, you see, the election day is just a day. It's just part of the entire electoral cycle. And from your experience, at what stage of the electoral cycle do we really see the manipulation really take effect? When does manipulation start? Where is it mostly done within the cycle? Where does it have most consequences from your experience? Because I've also heard that some people win elections at the point of voter verification. I've had that analogy. So you've just shared what really happens during campaigns and what really happens on the voting day. But are there other parts within the cycle or stages, for that matter, within the cycle where actually manipulation really can cost one an election from your experience?
Actually, the election cycle or electoral process cycle starts from the day you pronounce yourself in public that you want to contest for a certain leadership post. Not only MP, even at LC1 level, even at LC5, the manipulation starts there. How? The manipulation starts the day you pronounce the opponents. You know, politics, especially at parliamentary level, has been made so competitive. And I think for me, this I would call that we need to look at the benefits of parliamentarians and if need be streamline them, let it be clear, not people knowing even if I lose a billion, if I go in parliament I'll get it. And that sometimes that's why we get this, you hear committees are being bribed. It's because someone says even if I lose a billion, I'll gain it. So we need to streamline. What are the streamlined benefits of people who are in particular seats in parliament at LC5 level and possibly at LC1 level? So that someone knows that if I overcultivate, I am at a loss. Not to leave it so amorphous for someone also to invest amorphously. So the manipulation, the loss or the gain of election, or even the losing, sometimes you lose the day you register. Because what you've said is actually practically true. Is that sometimes when you register, some people, depending on how well they know the system, and this, by the way, does not have a party color. Now, so someone should not tell you a lie that it's NRM which cheats or it's a group which cheats or it's no, it doesn't have a party color. It is how well does this person know the system, and it depends. If it's, for example, in the central region, you find that Noop has a better advantage to cheat than in the western region where I come from. So that's why I'm saying it doesn't have a party color. So it starts then, because what you've said true, there is manipulation of registers. There's why, like they say, where even the dead votes, even what some people bringing in names that have never appeared in that area for the sake of increasing the number. Well known that if I registered this school, I am able to manipulate it, it will vote in my favor. It is starting from there. Before even you as a candidate you are nominated, the registers are already being tampered with. Even you. So when there is this business of come review the registration, we are displaying the voters register, cheating of election starts there. Well, that's why we see opponents fidgeting, everyone, and you know someone is telling you, yes, you had better go and register your people. But as you're doing that, you're told a group from Nyamtiobora, they brought a gang of people in the garage and they have all been registered in favor of Samson. Then before you know it, they will tell you this register has disappeared. Then before you know it, they will tell you these your voters are not possibly residents of that area. Depending now, you see, the manipulation starts with it's a collaboration. You collaborate with LC1 chairpersons, you collaborate with some polling assistants and polling officials, presiding officers. So it's a chain. It's a chain. It is that unfortunate. It's a chain, and actually, which starts. So as you've put it, it's an election cycle. So cheating, losing, and winning election is not actually on the voting day. Some people actually go well settled knowing that I have finished it when they start the registration review, voter register review. Then you start counting. I know you have 3, 4, 5 LC1 chairpersons. That area, that cell, I have finished it because the LC1 will not allow people who are not in my favor to vote. You have finished, and there is arrogance of I know the system. I know the system. I am good at manipulation. So that alone is a very, very big hiccup in our system, whereby you know you are going to use the influential people. Then even we Ugandans, you find you call them, you find the supervisors, the electoral supervisors, the invigilators, the everyone ready to negotiate money. How much do you want to give them for them to manipulate for you the register? We have reached that level for them to manipulate for you the register, and sometimes even bribing agents say if the votes 100 votes were for Bonnie and the 30 were for my opponent, to just change the name and put 30 for Bonnie, 100 for it. We've reached that level that even when I have a colleague in Western Uganda who I don't mention who said for them what they did, they changed the declaration forms. They put the votes which are intended to be for Bonnie on another person and the other person for Bonnie, and the other person didn't have votes. So he was actually crying and saying, Bonnie, at least for you, you are cheated, but you have votes on the paper. And for me, I have votes because I had a lot of support, and sometimes it would be so difficult to manipulate. But for him, he said, for you, you're cheated because me, I was fighting with the system. Me, I even don't have the votes. And for sure, that person we knew he was the most popular, he would even win with 90%. But he ended up not even getting 20%. And it was a matter of changing the declaration forms. So the whole issue goes back to money, because the way that happens is, as I've said, invigilators wait for who gives them money. Even some agents who are not inally committed wait to be given money to give in your declaration forms and to be changed, and they sign wrong results at on the declaration. Sometimes they even put results on the declaration which are not on the in the box, as long as one of your agents has agreed to be paid off. You've heard stories, you may call them stories, of where they say, just get off and let us write what we want. And then, like me, when we reached in the room where at Kamukuzu, where we were declaring votes, there's a certain box we were contesting, which we knew the votes they were saying were not in. But for some reason and for some manipulation, we demanded for reopening of the box, and it could not be done. And that is game done everywhere, whereby they reach a stage, work with the LC system, work with the electoral officials. What they do is they put what on the declaration form, what actually is not in the box. So the cycle, like you've asked me, starts on the day you declare that you want to contest as a politician in a particular area. Then that's when you know. Then there are also concoctions. Actually, when they are talking about this, like the bill which is currently being discussed, the bail bill, I pity most politicians for one reason, because there's a lot of framing. Some people, when they see that you have a lot of support and they can't manage you through the vote, because the truth is that sometimes you have a lot of support that no matter what they do, people will still vote you. Then they start framing you. They start writing letters, concocting cases on you. And some people, their work is just to say, let's disorganize her. Let's disorganize her. Let's write this letter, or either to State House or Security ISO, saying she's linked or allied with this group of rebels or with this group of opposition, like for us, in NRM, people frame you. You are an NRM, you are all NRM candidates, but a certain candidate says, you see this one, last night she was in the meeting with so and so. And they intended to know that you are going to waste a lot of time trying to clear yourself as the election process goes on. So that's how far it goes.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a confession from an active politician. And if someone from the NRM camp, the biggest party, and I would say the party that has monopoly of the money and the state apparatus, can share such an ordeal, then I don't know what my colleagues in the opposition would say. But let me bring you in here, Jude.
No, I say it has no color. Cheating in elections has no color. Has no color, has no party.
Sure. Let me bring you in
Not
here.
an NRM thing, but I wouldn't even call it a loop or what.
Okay. Our time is fast spent. I think I have less than 5 minutes to wrap this up. But Jude, quickly, if you may have comments on that one. But also, what can we do? Give us proposals. What can we put in place to mitigate electoral manipulation, especially within the context, the feasible solutions that could probably work in a context like Africa? Let's bring it home, actually in Uganda.
First and foremost, we need to know that if someone has said in...
sorry. That question has fired to Jude. I'll come to you as well, Bonnie. But let Jude first attempt that question. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, Felix. Again, what my colleague talks about is the software and the hardware. The software is the election engineering, and then the hardware is the electoral manipulation, things that you see on the election day or during the cycles. And the state is able to control these two processes. And I've told people many times that even some of the opposition politicians who come to parliament are aided and guided by the state. And I can tell you that without any doubt in my mind. And some of the people who come into politics do not necessarily come to serve, but to act as stooges for the state because they are easier to control by the government. If you have a very strong MP, let's say like the late Samia Bugu MP, Agurawori, you're better off having a monkey coming from that area than him coming to parliament to control policy. I remember most of the MPs at the time, when we started having the dispensation after 1986, most of them were elected based on their academic qualifications. For example, Ziri Tuawapua, as he was, came as an MP because he was then a lawyer. Being a lawyer in Kampala was a big deal. But let's come now to the issues of how do you prevent it. She's talked about the issues of the voter from down the pyramid coming up. And I think we've got a problem there of you don't know whom to blame, both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of distrust between the voter and the leader. Because the voter knows that the moment you become an MP, he's not going to see you until the next election. And I'll talk this from my point of experience. My area MP is Honorable Semuji Ibrahim Nganda. He only comes to visit me 2 days towards elections. After that, you just see him on talk shows. It's the same for even the other MPs. So it's no longer an issue of color. So what does the voter say? Pay me now. However small it is, it's about a game of survival. And that is the absurdity about elections. But how do you prevent it? Then you have to look at the whole game. It's a difficult thing. I can't give you an answer, but in my paper, I try to mention it back. You talk about democratic backsliding. It is deliberate. And now we're talking about electoral manipulation, but I want to change it to what we call strategic manipulation, because the state engineers this in a long-term basis. They know what they're doing. The role of the generals in the army is to control power, not just on the battlefield, but also off the battlefield. This is very critical. They control power not just on the battlefield, but also off the battlefield. And they know exactly that if this lady comes into parliament, she'll become a problem. And then they engineer these things and then make it hardware during the other side of the cycle. So there are a lot of recommendations that I put in my paper, and which I'll share with you later on for the viewers. But it's a game about controlling power and controlling that power sustainably. And that also includes controlling electric observers, who are basically merchants and tourists who come to Africa when it's cold in Europe. And then they come and endorse and then legitimize elections. So in one way or another, I sympathize with my colleague. I don't know how much he invested in that process, and I hope you still have money. Because most of them actually mortgage their houses. Most of them are highly indebted, that for the first 3 years, they have to hide from their constituents because they have to balance the book. Most MPs, after losing parliament, live wretched lives because some of them are not even employable because they've learned so little. It's only those who are prepared out of politics who can survive. And here I would like to invoke Bernard Mutiaba, who was the former MP for Machindia. He stepped down and he told people, when I look at my balance sheet, I'm putting in more and I'm taking out less. So that's the only MP who has come as far as saying, look, this is my balance sheet. I'm putting in so much effort and so much money, and I'm getting so less. So politics is not very ugly, especially when it has been commercialized to an industrial scale. And I really thank my colleague for having taken the courage to run for a woman MP, because unlike that one running for a constituency, running for a woman MP seat, you're running the whole of Mbarara, and that means you have to have a lot of resources.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. That was Jude. I have only 2 minutes to get us out of here. Bonnie, I'm giving you 1 minute to give us what can be done and your parting shot in a minute.
Thank you. 1 minute. Yes, what can be done? I'll be straight to the point. Like my colleague has said, good, thank you very much. What has to be done? I already said it. We need to streamline benefits, roles, and obligations of a parliamentarian so that people who are running know what they are going to do, what they are going to gain. Possibly it can stop this money push and pull in the constituency. Secondly, I still insist we need also, as parties, especially my NRM party and what, we need to change leadership of parties back in our districts, in our cities, so that some people don't grow in think that if I don't like Bonnie, she'll never go through. And you grow that wing and you have your personal bias and someone. So we need change of seats, change of leadership at local level, even on at national level, but at local level. Thirdly and lastly, I still insist I am a candidate, I am a candidate and a pusher and an advocate of mindset change. We need to work with government, with civil society organizations, with business community. Our country must be saved through mindset change. If this is not
Thank you
done,
so
I
much.
am afraid for our children, I am afraid for the upcoming generation on what intoxication that is in our mind. So we really need mindset change. And Jude is right to say that the voters also don't trust us who contest because most of us disappear. When you go back to Mbara City, you hear someone saying, where is the person who went through? What she only wanted a vote and she went. And this story is all over the country, like he's put it.
Okay.
So we also need to keep mentoring leaders who go through to know their roles both in parliament and in the constituency. But most importantly, let's embark on mindset change through these kind of forums, through radios, through TVs, workshops, meetings, and trainings for people to know how and why you should choose a particular leader. True, Jude, we are in
Great.
debt, but we
Great.
must move.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mindset change is the way to go. That was Boniki Choncho Mutungi, who contested for Mbara Stillman MP in the just completed elections, still the flag bearer of NRM, and I'm so sure I'll be able to see you again on the ballot paper come 2026. Like it's a habit of most politicians, they don't die out. And then I also had with me Jude Obitre, who is also a political analyst and a scholar. It's been a very great conversation. We were discussing money in politics and electoral manipulation. And my host was Felix Kafuma, the moderator. And I want to bring this to a close. Thank you for being part of this discussion and being with us. I wish you all a very great weekend and a week ahead. See you next time. Bye-bye. Stay safe.